The town of Grover's Mill, Kansas had one traffic light and two places to eat. The light worked about half the time. The places to eat were a gas station with a hot dog roller near the register and a diner on the corner of 5th and Callaway that had been called Vickers since Dale Vickers bought it from the original owner 11 years ago and painted his name on the glass in letters that were slightly too large for the window. Wren Callaway had been working inside that window for 7 months. She had taken the job in late October, 2 days after the lease on her previous apartment expired. And one day after the restaurant where she had been a prep cook for 2 years closed without warning or severance. She had walked into Vickers on a Tuesday morning with her hair pulled back and her hands still smelling faintly of onion from the box she had unpacked that weekend, and Dale Vickers had looked her up and down the way a man looks at furniture. He is deciding whether to keep, and he had said she could start Thursday. She had started Thursday. In the 7 months since Wren had learned the particular geography of surviving in a place that did not want her to thrive. She had learned which floorboards creaked near the kitchen pass-through, and how to step around them when she was carrying a full tray, so Dale would not hear her coming and have time to prepare something to say. She had learned that the early shift was safer than the late shift, because Dale drank coffee in the morning and bourbon in the afternoon, and the bourbon changed the register of his cruelty from sharp to broad. She had learned that the other staff would not meet her eyes when Dale made his remarks, not because they agreed with him, but because looking away was the only form of solidarity available to people who needed the work as much as she did. Wren was 24 years old. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she weighed more than the culture she had grown up in thought she should. A fact that had been communicated to her in so many ways and by so many people over so many years that she had stopped hearing it as cruelty and had started hearing it as weather. Something that existed. Something that came whether or not you deserved it. Dale Vickers had a specific gift for making it feel personal again. He called her the slow one. He called her the heavy one. He said these things in the kitchen, where the other staff could hear, and in the dining room when he thought the customers were not paying attention, and once memorably directly into the face of a couple from out of town who had not asked for his opinion and had looked at each other afterward with the specific discomfort of people who have witnessed something they did not want to witness. He said these things with the ease of a man who had never been made to stop, who had tested the limits of what he could say and had found that the limits were very far out indeed, farther than a 24-year-old woman who needed the paycheck could reasonably push back against. Wren had a journal. She had started it on her 3rd week of work, not out of any particular plan, but because she had come home one night and sat at her small kitchen table and found that she could not stop thinking about the specifics of what had happened that day. The exact words Dale had used, the exact amount that had been missing from her tip-out, the way he had changed the schedule on her 3rd straight day off, and then accused her of not being a team player when she asked about it. She had started writing it down, because writing it down made it real in a different way, made it a fact rather than a feeling, and facts were something she could hold on to in a way that feelings sometimes were not. The journal was a small thing, dark brown leather with a brass clasp that had come from a craft store on the other side of town. Over 7 months it had filled up with specifics, dates and times and the exact words Dale had used. Tip-out numbers that did not match what she had been told to expect. Schedule changes that always seemed to cost her rather than benefit her. The name of the health inspector who had come twice in 7 months and found nothing wrong both times despite the fact that the walk-in cooler had been running warm since January, and Wren had documented the temperature readings every time she opened the door. She did not know what she was going to do with the journal. She only knew that keeping it made her feel less powerless, and feeling less powerless was on most days enough to get her back through the door the following morning. What she was working toward was culinary school. There was a program in Wichita, a 2-year certificate in culinary arts, that would take her from where she was to somewhere worth going. The cost was specific enough to feel real $11,400 for tuition and materials. She had saved $9,000 over the past 18 months, most of it in a coffee can inside the cabinet above the refrigerator in her apartment on the second floor of a building that had working heat in the winter, and a landlord who fixed things within a reasonable window. She needed $2,400 more dollars. At the rate she was currently saving, she would have it by October. This was the arithmetic of her life. 7 months down, 4 more to go, and then she could leave Grover's Mill and Vickers Diner and Dale Vickers and all of it and walk into a kitchen where she belonged. She was allowed to want things. She was allowed to wait for them. She was allowed to endure the time between now and then, with her head down and her hands working and her journal filling up with the specific record of a man who thought he had more power over her life than he actually did. On the evening that everything changed, Wren was wiping down the counter at the far end of the diner when she heard the motorcycles. She heard them before she saw them, which was always how it was with motorcycles. The sound came first, a low, sustained rumble that was different from the sound of a truck engine or a car engine, richer, somehow more deliberate, the sound of machines that had been built to make exactly that sound and not apologize for it. She heard it growing as they came up 5th Street, and then she saw the lights through the front window. 4 sets of headlights pulling into the parking lot in a loose formation that became a single row as they found their spaces along the edge of the lot. She watched them dismount from across the diner. There were 4 of them. Large men, all of them in the specific way that certain men are large, not just in height or weight, but in presence in the amount of space they occupied, even when they were standing still. They wore leather vests over dark shirts. The vests marked with patches that Wren could not read from inside the diner. They moved with the particular unhurried ease of people who were not going to rush for anything, and who were confident in a way that did not require demonstration, that nothing was going to require them to. Wren went back to wiping the counter. She heard Dale's voice from the kitchen a moment later. He had been back there for the past hour, ostensibly doing inventory, but more likely doing the bourbon and complaining thing he did on evenings when he was in a certain mood. The mood had been building since mid-afternoon, which meant the evening was going to be one of the difficult ones. She heard him say something to the cook, a young man named Travis who kept his eyes on his station and his opinions to himself. She could not make out the words, but she heard the shape of them, the specific cadence of Dale's voice when he was constructing something at someone else's expense. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "Send her," he said. He said it to Travis, but he meant it for her to hear. "Send the heavy one. Let's see how long before those boys run her off." The kitchen staff made the sounds they made when Dale said these things. Not laughter exactly, more like the sounds of people performing the expected response to a man who had authority over their paychecks. Wren had cataloged these sounds over 7 months, the same way she had cataloged everything else. She set the cloth down. She picked up her order pad. She walked toward the front door. The parking lot had gone quiet. Through the glass, she could see the 4 motorcycles sitting in a row in the early June evening, the chrome catching the last of the low sunlight. The 4 men had come inside while she was preparing herself, and they had settled at the large booth in the back corner, the one that could technically seat 6, and they were looking at the menus with the detached concentration of people who have been reading menus in diners like this one for many years and know exactly what is worth ordering. Wren pushed through the kitchen door and walked toward them. She was aware of Dale watching from somewhere behind her. She was aware of Travis and the other kitchen staff with their angled glances. She was aware of the particular quality of the attention being paid to her, the anticipation of a punchline she was meant to be. She kept walking. The booth was in the corner, which meant she had to turn slightly as she approached, so that all four men came into view at once. The first three she registered as a group heavy-bearded, road-worn, the kind of men who looked like they had spent more time outdoors than in and had specific opinions about the difference. They were looking at their menus. One of them, the largest of the three, had his menu held up at an angle that suggested he was having trouble reading the smaller print. The fourth man was sitting at the end of the booth nearest the wall, and he was not looking at his menu. He was looking at her. Harlan Tanner had been called Brick for so long that almost no one remembered the name on his birth certificate. He was 61 years old, though he looked something between that number and something older and something younger. Simultaneously, the way certain men look when they have lived in a specific and demanding way for long enough that age becomes less relevant than the evidence of what they have been through. His beard was mostly gray with some dark still in it, kept short enough to be deliberate. His eyes were a particular shade of gray that was not warm exactly, but was not cold either, the gray of river rock, of something that had been shaped by movement over a long period of time. He was the chapter president of the Nevada chapter of the Hells Angels, and he had been riding for 38 years. And he and his crew were in Grover's Mill, Kansas, because they had been in Nebraska 2 days ago for a rally, and they were heading back south and west, and the sky had gone the wrong color, just past the Kansas border. And Sparks had needed gas, and the town had offered a diner. That was all. No plan, no prior knowledge of the town or its people, just the road and the weather and the need for food on the way to somewhere else. Brick was watching her because he had been watching the room since he walked in, which was something he had done for 38 years on the road and had no intention of stopping now. He watched rooms the way certain people read books quickly at first, to get the shape of the thing, then slower at specific passages that seemed to require more attention. The shape of this room had taken him about 12 seconds. He had seen the owner in the kitchen doorway when they came in. He had seen the way the man had looked at them, and then immediately looked at the young woman behind the counter, with something that was not quite a smile, and not quite a leer, but was in the uncomfortable neighborhood of both. He had seen the kitchen staff exchange a look. He had seen the young woman pick up her pad and start walking. He had watched her walk the length of the diner, and he had seen what she was carrying on her, not in her hands, but in her posture, in the way her shoulders were set, in the particular quality of her chin being held level. That was not confidence, but was the practiced performance of confidence, the way a person holds their face when they are expecting something that hurts and have decided not to give it the satisfaction of making them flinch. He knew that posture. He had seen it before. He had seen it in a specific kitchen in a specific city, on a specific afternoon 5 years ago, and had told himself that the woman wearing it was stronger than she looked, and would be fine, and had been wrong about that in a way that had rearranged the furniture of how he understood his own failures. Wren reached the booth and stopped. She could feel the moment the way you can sometimes feel the air before a door opens. She had her pad ready. She had her pen in her hand. She had her face arranged. Then Brick said the thing he said. He said it quietly, and he said it directly at her. Not at the table, not at the room, at her specifically. And what he said was, "You all right, ma'am?" Not the question itself was unusual. The question itself was ordinary enough, the kind of thing a person says in passing. What was not ordinary was the way he said it. There was no performance in it. There was no irony and no pity, and no setup for something that would come after. It was a question that existed only as itself asked by a man who was looking at her with the specific and complete attention of someone who was genuinely waiting for an answer. Wren had not been asked that question in a long time. She stood there for a moment in which she was aware of too many things at once: the counter behind her, where Dale might still be watching the kitchen. Behind the pass-through, the three other men at the table who had looked up from their menus at some point and were now looking at her with expressions that were varying degrees of neutral. And this one man in the corner who was waiting for an answer to a question that should have been simple. She said she was fine. Brick nodded. He looked at her for another moment in the specific way of someone who is noting something for future reference, and then he looked down at his menu. The other men followed his lead. Wren took their orders. She wrote them down on the pad in her careful handwriting. The same handwriting she used in her journal. The same handwriting she had used when she wrote down the dates and the amounts and the exact words. She read the order back. She confirmed the coffee. She walked back toward the kitchen. She did not look at Dale when she passed the kitchen doorway. She heard the silence she passed through, the silence of a joke that had not landed the way it was supposed to land, and she kept walking. At the kitchen pass-through, she put the order up and stood for a moment with her back to the dining room. Her hands were not entirely steady. She made them steady. That was a thing she had become very good at over 7 months. Behind her, she could hear the low conversation from the corner booth, too far away and too quiet to make out words. She heard the particular low register of the man at the end, the one with the gray beard, speaking in a tone that was different from when he had spoken to her. Quieter, more specific. She would find out later what he said in those 30 seconds. She would find out that he said it to the man on his left, the one with the short red hair, and the watchful expression that was the expression of someone accustomed to finding things in numbers that other people missed. She would find out that what he said was, pull everything you can find on the owner of this place. Tax filings, supplier contracts, health inspection reports, business license, history. All of it. Tonight. She did not know this yet. What she knew was that the booth in the corner had gone quiet again, and that the 4 men were reading their menus, and that Dale was somewhere behind her in the building having a bad evening, and that in 4 months she would have the money she needed. And none of this would matter anymore. The dinner rush, such as it was, ran from 6 until about 8:30. Grover's Mill was not a large town, and Vickers was not a large diner, and the rush was more of a steady trickle than a true rush, but it was enough to keep Wren moving for most of the 2.5 hours. She refilled coffees and brought out plates and cleared tables, and split her attention between the work in front of her and the low-level vigilance she maintained around Dale's position in the room at all times. Dale was in a specific mood tonight. She had cataloged enough of his moods to know the varieties, and this one was the kind that needed an audience, that needed to perform itself in front of other people to feel complete. He had made 2 comments about her speed by 8 o'clock, both in the kitchen where Travis and the dishwasher could hear. He had changed a table's order ticket after she had already put it up, making her look as though she had made a mistake, and he had done this with the particular precision of someone who had practiced the move. The 4 men from the corner booth had been quiet and efficient customers. They ate without complaint. They drank several cups of coffee each. The one Wren had mentally labeled the largest one a man, with a Louisiana-style slowness to his movements, and a name she would later learn was Cutter had ordered 2 pieces of pie, and had eaten them both methodically and without any visible sign of either pleasure or dissatisfaction. The one with the red hair, whose road name she would later learn was Sparks, had spent most of the meal looking at his phone with an expression of focused concentration. that had nothing to do with anything social. The man at the end of the booth had drunk 4 cups of coffee and had not looked at his phone at all. He had looked at the room. He had looked at the way the diner operated at the kitchen pass-through and the front door, and the register near the wall with the slow, systematic attention of someone who was reading something in the arrangement of things. And twice that Wren noticed he had looked at Dale. Not the way a customer looks at a restaurant owner. The way a mechanic looks at an engine that is making a sound it should not be making. At 8:15, Dale came out of the kitchen and stopped near the register, which put him roughly in the center of the dining room and gave him a clear sightline to most of the tables. There were 5 tables occupied at that point, including the booth in the corner. Wren was clearing a 2-top near the window. She heard Dale clear his throat in the way he cleared his throat when he was preparing to say something for the benefit of an audience. He said it to the room, but he looked at her when he said it. He said something about how it must be nice to take so long with the simple tasks. Something about how the other girls had managed to clear 3 tables in the time it had taken her to clear 1. Something that was technically about the work, but was in practice about her, specifically about her body, about the way she moved, framed in the language of productivity so that anyone who objected could be told they were being oversensitive. The dining room did the thing it did. A couple near the back looked at their plates. A man at the counter stirred his coffee. Travis retreated further into the kitchen. Wren continued clearing the 2-top. She stacked the plates in the order that made them easiest to carry. She moved toward the kitchen. She passed within earshot of the corner booth. The man at the end spoke quietly, not loudly enough for Dale to hear from across the room, but clearly enough for Wren to catch it as she passed. He said, "How long has he been doing that to you?" Wren stopped. She did not mean to stop. She meant to keep walking, to take the plates to the kitchen and come back out and do the work and let the evening pass the way every evening passed. But something about the question, about the directness of it, about the fact that it acknowledged specifically what was happening and refused to let her pretend she had not heard it, stopped her feet before her brain had made the decision. She turned slightly. Brick was looking at her, the same even undemanding attention as before. He had not raised his voice. He was not performing concern for the benefit of anyone watching. He was asking her a question, and he was waiting for her answer, and the answer mattered to him for reasons she could not yet see. She said, 7 months. She said it quietly, barely above the ambient sound of the diner. Brick nodded once. He looked down at his coffee cup for a moment. Then he looked up, not at her this time, but past her toward the kitchen with the expression of a man who has added a number to a column he has been keeping and has arrived at a total he already expected. Wren carried the plates to the kitchen. She did not look at Dale when she passed him. In the kitchen, she set the plates in the bus tub and stood for a moment at the pass-through, looking through the window at the dining room at the corner booth where the 4 men were settling their bill with the efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. She could see the man at the end of the booth reaching into his vest pocket. She went back out to take the payment. When she got to the booth, the bill was already settled. The cash laid flat on the table with a tip that was almost exactly double the cost of the meal. The 4 men were standing, putting their jackets back on, adjusting the things riders adjust before they go back to their machines. Wren took the bill folder and the cash and thanked them and told them to have a safe ride. 3 of them moved toward the door. The 4th, the man with the gray beard, paused. He was standing close enough that she could see the patches on his vest clearly now. She recognized the death's head. She knew what it meant, what organization it marked. She had grown up in Kansas, and you grew up knowing. He was not looking at the door. He was looking at her. He took something from the pocket of his vest, a small piece of paper, the kind torn from a notepad, and he held it out toward her. She took it without thinking. On it was a phone number written in a clean, deliberate hand, the handwriting of someone accustomed to writing things down accurately. He said, "If it gets worse at work, call this number." He said it simply the way you say a fact that does not require elaboration. Then he turned and walked out the door, and Wren stood holding the piece of paper and watching through the window as the four men crossed the parking lot to where the motorcycles waited in a row. She watched them go through the glass. The engines started one by one the sound building from single notes into a chord, and then they were pulling out onto 5th Street, and the sound was moving away down the dark road, and then it was gone and there was just the diner again. The hum of the kitchen, the smell of coffee that had been on the burner too long, the sound of Dale's voice from somewhere in the back. Wren looked at the piece of paper in her hand. She put it in the pocket of her apron. The rest of her shift passed without incident, which was its own kind of mercy. Dale had retreated into a quieter version of his evening mood, the kind that expressed itself in passive irritants, rather than direct confrontation. A supply order she was told about at the last minute, a task assigned after she had already cleaned and restocked the section. It applied to the kind of management that was less about the work and more about reminding her of the hierarchy. She did these things. She did them without comment and without expression. She was good at this. 7 months of practice had made her very good at this. At 10:15, she clocked out. She changed her shoes in the back room where the staff kept their personal items. She put on her jacket. She took her bag from the hook on the wall. And in the bag was the journal, dark brown leather brass clasp, the record of everything that had happened in this building since late October. She said goodnight to Travis, who nodded without looking up. She went out through the back door into the employee parking area, a narrow strip of asphalt between the building and the chain-link fence that separated it from the lot behind the hardware store. Her car was a 2009 Civic with 160,000 miles on it, and a passenger side mirror held in place by a combination of the mirror's own structural integrity and a strip of packing tape that Wren replaced every 3 or 4 months. She got in the car. She put her bag on the passenger seat. She sat for a moment in the dark with the engine not yet started. Through the small window of the back door, she could see the light from the kitchen and the shape of Travis moving past the pass-through. Inside the building, Dale Vickers was doing whatever Dale Vickers did at the end of his evening, counting the register or going over the schedule, or simply existing in the space that he owned and that she had to leave. Wren reached into her apron pocket and took out the piece of paper. She held it up to read the number in the ambient light from the parking area lamp. Just a number. No name. Nothing to explain who had written it or why or what exactly calling it would mean. She put the paper on the seat beside her. She reached into her bag and took out the journal. She turned on the interior light. She opened the journal to the last page of entries, the most recent one from 2 days ago. For 7 months, the entries had been the same dates, amounts, words used, actions taken. The specific record of a specific pattern of behavior. Evidence. She had been building something in those pages without fully knowing what she was building, documenting, without fully knowing the purpose of the documentation. Tonight, she took out her pen and she wrote today's date. She wrote, 4 men came in tonight. Hell's Angels. Dale sent me to their table to humiliate me. The one at the end of the booth asked if I was all right. Later, he asked how long it had been going on. I said 7 months. He gave me his number. He said, call if it gets worse. She stopped writing and looked at what she had written. Then she wrote one more line. She wrote, that was the first time in 7 months anyone asked if I was all right. I didn't know what to say. She closed the journal. She put it back in her bag. She started the car and pulled out of the parking area onto 5th Street and drove home through a town that was mostly dark and mostly quiet, and that would look exactly the same in the morning as it had this morning and every morning before it, except that something had shifted. Not in the town. In her. Something small and specific. The kind of shift that does not announce itself and does not feel dramatic from the inside, but that changes in ways that take time to fully understand the angle at which you approach the days that come after. She would not know for several more days what Sparks had done in the 20 minutes after they left the diner that night. She would not know that he had opened 3 different databases on his phone before they had even reached the edge of town, pulling tax filings and health inspection records and supplier contract histories and business license applications. The kind of information that exists in public records precisely because it is meant to be available to the public, and that nonetheless requires a specific kind of attention to find and read. She would not know that by the time they stopped for the night at a motel 40 miles south of Grover's Mill, Sparks had filled 2 pages of notes on his phone and had told Brick 3 things. The first thing was that the health inspector who had visited Vickers' diner twice in the past 7 months had signed off on a facility that had a documented cooling equipment malfunction. On record, the kind of malfunction that should have triggered a mandatory reinspection before approval. The second thing was that there was a line item in the diner's public business records from 14 months ago showing a legal settlement payment that had been processed through the business account and classified as a consulting fee. The kind of creative accounting that was legal in the specific technical sense, but that typically indicated something that someone had wanted to go away quietly. The third thing was that the total amount of the settlement was $15,000, which was not nothing, and that there was no consultant on record who had received that money, which meant it had gone somewhere, that someone had gone to some trouble to obscure. Wren would not know any of this on the drive home. What she knew was the number on the seat beside her, and the 7 months behind her, and the 4 months ahead, and the $2,400 she still needed, and the weight of the journal in her bag, and the specific feeling of being asked plainly, and without agenda, whether she was all right. She parked in front of her building. She sat for a moment before getting out. She picked up the piece of paper from the seat. She put it inside the front cover of her journal, tucked under the leather flap, where she kept receipts and notes, things she wanted to keep but not look at every time she opened it. Then she went upstairs and made tea and sat at her small kitchen table and did not sleep for a long time, thinking about something she had not thought about seriously in 7 months. The possibility that the 4 months between now and October might not have to pass the way the previous 7 had passed. The possibility that the arithmetic of her life was not the only arithmetic available. She did not know what that meant yet. She only knew that someone had asked. 3 days after the motorcycles left Grover's Mill, Wren's phone rang at 7:40 in the morning while she was standing at her kitchen counter eating toast and trying not to think about the shift that started at 9. The number on the screen was the number from the piece of paper in the front cover of her journal. She answered it. The voice on the other end was not the voice she expected. It was younger, more clipped, with the specific cadence of someone accustomed to delivering information concisely. The man introduced himself as Sparks and said he was calling on behalf of Brick and asked if Wren had 20 minutes to talk. She said she did. He asked her 3 questions. The first was whether she had ever seen Dale Vickers personally handle a customer complaint that was resolved unusually quickly. particularly any complaint involving food quality or illness. The second was whether she had noticed Dale behaving differently around the health inspector visits either before or after. The third was whether she had any documentation of tip income that was inconsistent with what she was paid out. She told him she had documentation of all three. He asked if she could bring the documentation to a meeting. He said Brick would be back in Grover's Mill on Saturday. He gave her the name of a coffee shop on the north end of town that was not Vickers. He said 10 in the morning and asked if that worked. She said it worked. After she hung up, she stood for a moment in her kitchen with the toast in her hand and the morning light coming through the window above the sink. Then she went to get her journal. The coffee shop was called Marjorie's, and it had been there since before Wren was born. The kind of place where the furniture did not match, and the coffee was strong, and the owner knew the names of the regulars, and the regulars came in at the same times every day. Wren had been here twice before, both times on days off when she needed to be somewhere that was not her apartment and not the diner. She arrived at 9:55 and found Brick already there. He was sitting at a table in the back corner, which she would later understand was the table he always chose when he had a choice, the one with a wall behind him and a clear sight line to the front door. He had a cup of coffee in front of him. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking at the window and the Saturday morning traffic on the road outside, the quiet traffic of a small town on a weekend pickup trucks, and a woman walking a dog and a teenager on a bicycle. He looked up when she came in, and what she saw in his expression was the thing she had noticed the first time in the diner, the absence of performance. He was not performing welcome, and he was not performing authority, and he was not performing anything. He was just a man at a table who had been waiting for her. She sat down across from him. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Marjorie, who was actually named Marjorie, and who had named the shop after herself with the straightforward confidence of someone who sees nothing wrong. With that, brought Wren a coffee without being asked. She had apparently been briefed. Wren put the journal on the table between them. Brick looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then he said, "You can keep it in your hands if you want. I don't need to hold it. I just need you to walk me through what's in it." So she did. She talked for 40 minutes. She went through the journal page by page, not reading every word, but summarizing the entries by category, the way she had come to organize it in her own mind. The remarks, which were the body of it, the specific and dated record of what Dale had said, and who had heard it, and in what context. The financial discrepancies, which she had organized chronologically, the tip-out amounts that did not match what she was told to expect. The schedule changes that always seemed to cost her hours in the week they occurred. The health inspection records, which she had noticed because she had been the one to let the inspector in both times and had noted the inspector's name and had later looked it up and found that the same inspector had visited 11 different establishments in the county over the past year and had cited exactly 0 of them for any violation. She told him about the walk-in cooler. She had been recording the temperature readings for 4 months every time she opened the door, because the cooler had been running warm since January, and the warm reading had never quite crossed the threshold. That would have required a mandatory report, but it stayed consistently close to that threshold, close enough that she had started to wonder whether it was staying close on purpose. Brick listened to all of it without interrupting. He drank his coffee. He looked at the journal when she was referencing a specific page, and he looked at her when she was speaking from memory, and he looked at his hands occasionally, which she would come to understand was what he did when something he was hearing required him to think carefully before responding. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You built this for a reason, even if you didn't know what the reason was yet." She said she had needed to know it was real. that she had not been imagining it or making it worse than it was. He said you weren't imagining it. She had known this. She had known it every day for 7 months. But there was something specific about hearing it said, plainly by another person without qualification, without the suggestion that there might be another way to look at it, that did something to the part of her that had spent 7 months managing the doubt that crept in on the hard days. She looked at him. He was looking at his hands again. Then he looked up and he said, I had a daughter. Her name was Jenny. She was 22 when she died. She had been working a service job for 2 years. A supervisor who operated the same way your boss operates the same mechanism. Different words. She didn't tell me how bad it was. I didn't ask often enough. By the time I understood what I was looking at, I had looked at it too late. He said this in the tone of a man delivering a fact that he has delivered to himself many times and has learned to deliver without breaking, not because it no longer hurts, but because breaking does not serve the purpose. Wren did not say she was sorry. She understood that he was not asking for sympathy. He was explaining why he was sitting across from her at a table in a coffee shop in a town he had passed through by accident 5 days ago. He was explaining the arithmetic of his presence. She nodded once. He nodded back. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the window again. Then he said, Sparks has been going through the financial records. Public filings, what's available through the State Business Registry Health Department documentation. He's found some things. He wants to go through them with you because there are some things only you would know to confirm. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table and turned the screen toward her. What Sparks had assembled over 3 days was the kind of document that looks simple until you understand what each line represents. It was a spreadsheet, the working kind not cleaned up for presentation, with color coding that Sparks had applied in the way of someone who thinks in numbers and color codes everything as a matter of habit. There were columns for dates, amounts, account classifications, and a fourth column that Sparks had labeled Source Cross-Reference, which meant he had pulled the same transaction from 2 different public filings and confirmed that they matched, or in several cases confirmed that they did not. The discrepancies Sparks had found were not dramatic. That was the thing about fraud that was constructed by someone careful. It did not look like fraud from a distance. It looked like bookkeeping, like the ordinary imprecision of a small business managing its accounts without the benefit of a professional accountant. The pattern only became visible when you looked at enough of it, when you had enough data points to understand that the imprecision was not random, but was consistently directional, always moving money in the same direction, always to the same destinations. One destination in particular. Brick set a second screen next to the spreadsheet, a document that looked like a bank routing summary, and he pointed to a specific entry. This is an account, he said, that received regular monthly transfers from Vickers Diner over the past 2.5 years. The transfers are categorized in the diner's filings as consulting fees. There is no consultant on record who received this money. Wren looked at the account number. She looked at the amount. It was not a large amount per month, several $100s consistent. The kind of amount that looks like a subscription service or a recurring vendor payment, if you are not looking closely. She asked if they knew whose account it was. Brick said yes. The health inspector's name was Gerald Mott, and he had worked for the county for 18 years and had never been cited for anything, and had a clean record with the state licensing board. His name was not on the account directly. The account was in the name of a property management LLC, registered to his wife's maiden name, which was a level of construction that required forethought. The kind of forethought that suggests the arrangement was not impulsive. Wren sat with this for a moment. She thought about the warm walk-in cooler and the inspector who had visited twice and found nothing wrong. She thought about the way Dale had stood near the kitchen door both times the inspector came, relaxed in a way that was different from his usual tension around authority figures, the ease of a man who knows the outcome before the process begins. She said he's been paying for the inspections to pass. Brick said that was what the numbers suggested. She asked what else. He turned to a different part of the document. He pointed to a single line item from 14 months ago. A payment classified as a legal settlement, processed through the business account, and then reclassified in the following quarter's filing as a professional services expense. The amount was $15,000. Wren looked at the date. Something shifted in her chest. She opened her journal. She found the entry she was looking for from 14 months ago. In the early weeks when she had been new enough that she documented everything, even the things that seemed minor. She had written about a shift during which Dale had been unusually agitated, during which he had rushed her through clearing and resetting a specific table 3 times in 40 minutes, which was not standard procedure, and which she had noted because the urgency had seemed out of proportion to the situation. She had noted the table number. She had also, because she documented everything in those early weeks, noted the name of the customer who had occupied that table, because the customer's credit card had been declined, and Wren had needed to get Dale to override the system. And Dale had handled it himself, and had been short with the customer in a way that was sharper than his usual sharpness. The sharpness of someone who wanted a specific person out of his building quickly. The customer's name was June Carver. Wren told Brick what she had found in the journal. He looked at the entry. He looked at the name. Then he looked at her and said, "Do you remember anything about that customer? About how she seemed?" Wren thought back 14 months, which was before she had developed the particular narrowing of attention that comes with being in survival mode, when she still had enough bandwidth to notice things that were not directly related to her own situation. She remembered a woman in her late 50s alone at the table who had not eaten much of her meal and who had asked to speak to the manager. She remembered that Dale had handled it himself, which was unusual in that after the conversation the woman had left and Dale had come back into the kitchen and had fired a line cook named Marcus on the spot for something that in the moment had not seemed to have a clear proximate cause. She told Brick this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 14 months ago, a customer who ate at Vickers' Diner was admitted to the hospital with symptoms consistent with severe food contamination. The case was opened with the county health department and was closed 3 days later without findings. Gerald Mott was the inspector assigned to the case. Wren heard this. She heard the structure of it, the way the pieces fit together, into a shape that was larger than any individual piece. Dale had paid a health inspector to overlook ongoing violations. A customer had been made seriously ill. The case had been closed without findings by the same inspector. The customer had received $15,000 from the diner's accounts, and that money had been filed under a name that obscured what it was. A line cook who had been present during whatever happened in the kitchen that day had been fired before he could be interviewed. She said she almost died. Brick did not say anything. She said it again more quietly. She could have died, and he buried it. Brick looked at his coffee cup. He said, "The money she was paid came with a confidentiality agreement, standard language for these kinds of settlements signed under circumstances where she likely did not have legal representation and did not fully understand what she was agreeing to. We found her." Wren looked at him. He said, "She's living in Salina." 40 miles west. She wouldn't talk to Sparks on the phone. He said she sounded frightened. The agreement has penalty clauses. If she speaks about it, she can be sued for the return of the money and additional damages. She's a woman in her late 50s living alone on a fixed income. $15,000 is not money she can afford to give back. Wren asked what they were going to do. Brick said he was going to drive to Salina tomorrow. She asked if she could come. He looked at her for a moment. He said yeah. June Carver lived in a single-story house on a street of similar houses in a neighborhood that was neither poor nor comfortable. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns were maintained but not landscaped, and the cars in the driveways were older models, and the houses had the look of places where people had lived for a long time, without being able to change much about them. Her house had a front porch with 2 chairs on it, and a wind chime hanging near the door, and a flower bed that had been recently weeded. Brick knocked. Wren stood slightly behind and to his left, which was where she found herself standing without having made a conscious decision about it. The woman who opened the door was 60 years old or close to it, with gray in her hair and a careful wariness in her expression that Wren recognized from mirrors and from other women she had known in situations where they had learned that wariness was the reasonable response. She looked at Brick first, which was natural because Brick was hard to miss. And then she looked at Wren, and in the moment of looking at Wren, something shifted in her expression. A recognition of something she was not going to name. Brick said he was sorry to come to her home unannounced. He said he was not there to cause her trouble or to ask her to do anything she did not want to do. He said he had one question, and she was free to answer it, or not, as she chose. June Carver looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped back from the door and gestured for them to come in. Her living room was the living room of a woman who had arranged things the way she liked them, and had not changed the arrangement in some years. A specific kind of order. The order of someone who lived alone, and whose space had therefore become purely their own. There were photographs on the shelves. Family children at various ages, a dog that appeared in many of the photos, and not in any of the recent ones. There was a stack of library books on the end table next to the couch. They sat. June Carver sat in the chair that was clearly her chair, the one positioned toward the window. Brick said he had found the payment records and the health inspection records, and he understood the situation she was in with the confidentiality agreement, and he was not asking her to violate it. He said he was asking one question that had nothing to do with the agreement. He said, "Are you all right, June?" Carver looked at him. The look lasted several seconds. In it, Wren could see something moving behind the woman's eyes, some internal calculation of what this question meant, and who was asking it, and why. Then, June Carver said, "I spent 8 days in the hospital. My kidney function was affected. It took 14 months to get back to where I am now. And where I am now is not where I was before. No, I am not all right." Brick nodded. He said, "There is a woman who works in that diner right now. She has been working there for 7 months. The man who runs the place has been treating her the way he treated you in different ways, but with the same fundamental disregard for the cost to her. He has been doing it because he has been doing it to people for a long time, and no one has made him stop. We have documentation of the financial fraud and the inspection payments, and we are prepared to bring it to the appropriate people. But what happened to you is the most serious thing in the record, and without someone who can speak to it from the inside, it becomes a financial case instead of what it actually is. He said it plainly without pressure in his tone, the way he said most things. He was not telling June Carver what to do. He was telling her what was true. Then he said, "I'm not asking you to do anything today. I'm asking you to think about whether there is something you want to do. Whatever you decide, the financial case moves forward regardless. But you are the part of this that he went to the most trouble to make disappear. And you have a choice about whether you want to stay disappeared." June Carver looked at her hands. She looked at Wren. She said, "How old are you?" Wren said, 24. June Carver was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" They drove back to Grover's Mill in the late afternoon. The sun going sideways across the flat Kansas landscape the way it goes in June, making the fields on either side of the highway look golden and serious at the same time. Wren sat in the passenger seat of Brick's truck and watched the road and thought about the weight of what had been set in motion. The meeting with June Carver had lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, June had her confidentiality agreement on the table, and Sparks, who had been on the phone for most of the second hour, had connected her with a legal aid attorney in Wichita who specialized in exactly this kind of contract and who had apparently opinions about agreements signed without independent legal counsel that were strong and specific. June had been given a number to call and a timeline that Sparks had laid out with the precision of someone who had thought it through. June Carver had not committed to anything before they left, but she had kept the attorney's number. In the truck, Brick said, "You did good in there." Wren said she had not done much. He said, "You were there. She looked at you the way she did because you were there, because you were the person it was still happening to. That's not nothing. That's the thing that made it real to her in a way that financial records can't make it real." Wren looked at the road. She said, "I keep thinking about the cook. Marcus. The one Dale fired the day it happened. Brick said Sparks found him. He's working in Lawrence now. He's willing to talk." Wren turned to look at him. Brick kept his eyes on the road. He said, "The kitchen staff often are. They're not protected the way servers are, and they see everything that happens in a kitchen, and they carry it. He has been carrying this one for 14 months. When Sparks called him, he talked for 40 minutes. Wren looked back at the road. She thought about Marcus, whom she had never met, who had watched something happen in a kitchen and had been fired the next day, and had been carrying the specific weight of that for 14 months. She thought about all the people in all the kitchens of all the establishments that existed in the world, where someone was carrying something that was too heavy to carry alone, and was carrying it alone anyway because the alternative required something they were not sure they had. She thought about her journal. 9 months of mornings getting up and going back through that door. She said, "When does this move forward?" Brick said, "When you're ready. The documentation is complete enough to go to the state attorney general's office and the county health department and the labor board simultaneously. Sparks has the filing ready. It goes when you say go." She asked what happened to her job when it did. He said Dale will shut the place down or be forced to shut it down within a week of the filings. You won't have a job to go back to. She looked at her hands. She said, "I'm $2,400 short of what I need for culinary school." He said, "I know. Sparks found the school. He found the program cost and the timeline. He told me." She said, "That's a lot of information." He said, "Sparks is thorough." She said, "So what do I do in the meantime?" He did not answer immediately. He drove for a while with the late sun on the windshield and the fields going by on both sides. Then he said, "There's a conversation we should have about that." But not today. Today was enough for one day. She agreed with this. The week that followed was the strangest of Wren's 7 months in Grover's Mill, because it was a week in which she had to continue being exactly who she had been, walking through the same door at the same time and doing the same work with the same expression, while knowing that beneath the surface of the ordinary was ending. Dale had not changed. This was the most disorienting thing. She had expected that her own changed knowledge of the situation would somehow be visible, that she would walk in carrying it, and he would see it, and things would accelerate before she was ready. But Dale was exactly as he had always been. The same schedule adjustments, the same remarks, the same kitchen dynamics. He was a man who had operated a specific way for a long time and saw no reason to change because nothing in his environment had yet changed. She went home each evening and sat at her kitchen table and waited. On Thursday, Sparks sent her a message that said June Carver had called the attorney. On Friday, Marcus drove from Lawrence and met Sparks at the coffee shop and added his account to the documentation. Wren was not there for this meeting, but Sparks sent her a summary afterward that she read twice at the kitchen table, with her journal open beside it. On Saturday evening, she closed the diner at 10 and walked to her car in the back parking area, the way she always did, bag over one shoulder, keys in her hand, moving through the narrow strip of asphalt between the building and the chain-link fence. Dale was there. He was standing near the fence at the far end of the parking strip, which was not where he usually stood when he came out to the back, and he was standing the way a man stands when he has been waiting, when he arrived at the location first and has had time to arrange himself. He had a cup of coffee in his hand from the kitchen, still steaming in the cooler evening air. Wren slowed. He said her name. She stopped. He moved toward her, and the movement was not aggressive in the legal sense of the word. But it was not neutral either. It was the movement of someone who wanted to reduce distance. He stopped when he was close enough that she would have to step back or angle sideways to create more space. And he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the loose contempt of his usual mode, but something tighter, more focused. He said, "I know you've been talking to those bikers." She said nothing. He said, "I know what you think you're doing." He said it with the flatness of someone who has thought this conversation through and has the version he wants her to receive. You think because someone paid attention to you for 5 minutes that you have something. He said, "You are a part-time waitress in a diner in the middle of nowhere, and you don't have anything." He stepped slightly closer. He said, "Stop whatever you're doing." He said, "If you keep on with this, you're going to lose more than this job." He let the implication sit. Then he turned and walked back toward the building door. Wren stood in the parking strip for a moment after the door closed behind him. The evening was quiet. The chain-link fence caught the light from the parking area lamp. She could hear the highway a block over, the occasional sound of a truck passing. She reached into her bag. She took out her phone. She found the message thread with the number Brick had given her, the same number from the piece of paper in the front of her journal. And she typed a short message. She described what had just happened. She described what Dale had said, the exact words as best she could remember them, which was well because she was accustomed to remembering exact words. She sent it. 40 seconds later, her phone showed a reply. One line. It said, "Cutter has it." She looked up. Across the parking strip past the chain-link fence in the parking lot of the hardware store, a dark blue pickup truck was parked at an angle that gave a clear sightline to the employee parking strip. The driver's side window was down. A man was sitting behind the wheel. Wren looked at the truck for a long moment. Then she looked back at her phone. She understood in that moment the full shape of what was happening. Dale had come out to the back parking area tonight because he believed the threat of losing her job and the implicit suggestion of something worse would be enough to make her stop. He had done this because it had worked before, because he had been applying various forms of this pressure to various people for long enough that he believed it reliably produced the outcome he wanted. He had not known that there was a man with a camera 40 feet away who had been there for 20 minutes before Wren walked out the door. Dale had believed he was delivering a threat in private. What he had actually done was deliver testimony. Wren put her phone in her bag. She walked to her car. She got in. She sat for a moment in the quiet with her hands on the steering wheel. She thought about October and culinary school and the $2,400. She thought about June Carver in her house in Salina, with the library books on the end table and the old photographs of the dog. She thought about Marcus driving from Lawrence to sit in a coffee shop and talk for 40 minutes about something he had been carrying for 14 months. She started the car. She pulled out of the employee parking area onto 5th Street. She drove 3 blocks, stopped at the one traffic light in Grover's Mill, which was working tonight, and waited for it to change. Then she drove home. She did not open her journal when she got there. She did not need to write anything down tonight. Tonight was not a night for documentation. The documentation had been handled by other hands in a parking lot where she had not known anyone was watching. And what it contained was the cleanest possible version of what Dale Vickers actually was when the performance of authority was stripped away and the private man was visible. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table. She thought about Brick's voice when he had said Jenny would have liked this place. He had not said it yet. That was still ahead of her. But she would remember later that she had thought of it that night, that she had felt the weight of something not yet said, that was already true. The feeling of a future memory. The sense that the present moment was one she would return to. She drank her tea. Outside the kitchen window, the town was quiet and dark and unchanged. The same town it had been every night for the 7 months she had been in it. In 4 days, the filings would go in simultaneously to 3 different offices and the town would begin to change. Or rather, the part of the town that operated at the address on the corner of 5th and Callaway would begin to change, and the change would be irreversible. She was ready for that. She had been ready for something for a long time. She had not known what to call it until recently. She had called it culinary school, and she had called it the money in the coffee can, and she had called it October. But underneath all of those names, it was the same thing. It was the thing Brick had named when he asked her the question in the diner. She finished her tea. She rinsed the cup. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. In the morning, she would go back through the door. One more time. There were not many mornings left. The filings went in on a Wednesday morning at 9:15 simultaneously to 3 offices: the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, the County Health Department, and the Kansas Department of Labor. Sparks had prepared each package separately and had coordinated the timing with the precision of someone who understood that the sequence mattered, that arriving at 3 desks at the same moment removed the possibility of a phone call between offices that might give Dale Vickers time to respond before the response was no longer useful. Wren was at work when it happened. She was refilling the syrup dispensers on the tables, which was a task Dale had assigned to the opening shift, because he knew she found it tedious. She was on the 4th table when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, and she looked at the screen and saw the message from Sparks that said, "Sent." She put the phone back in her pocket. She finished filling the syrup dispensers. She carried the tray back to the kitchen and rinsed it and hung it on the hook where it lived between uses. She went back out to the dining room and did the work of the morning shift the way she always did. Dale came in at 10:30 as he usually did, with his coffee from home in a travel mug and his phone in his hand, and the specific energy of a man arriving at a place he owned. He looked at the dining room with the practiced eye of someone checking for problems to correct. He found one near the window, a smudge on the glass that Travis had missed during the closing clean the night before, and he made a point of letting Travis know about it loud enough for the dining room to hear. Wren watched Dale, and she did not feel the thing she might have expected to feel. She did not feel triumph or satisfaction or the particular release of tension that she had imagined might come when the process finally began. What she felt was something quieter and more functional than any of those things. She felt the specific clarity of a person who has made a decision and is on the other side of the making of it, where there is nothing left to deliberate and nothing left to manage, except the remaining hours before the consequences of the decision arrive. She worked her shift. She served the table she was assigned. She made coffee and cleared plates and refilled water glasses and split her tips in the way she always did, noting the amount in the back of her journal during the 15 minutes she had on her break. At 2:15, she clocked out. She drove home. She changed out of her work clothes. She sat at the kitchen table with the journal open, and she wrote the date and the time that the filings had gone in, and the fact that she had been at work when it happened, which seemed like a detail worth having on the record. Then she closed the journal and made a sandwich and ate it, standing at the counter looking out the kitchen window at the parking lot behind her building, where a man was teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle in the unoccupied half of the lot. The daughter was 7 or 8 and was doing the wobbling, determined, half-controlled thing that children do when they are learning something that requires the body to understand what the mind already knows. The father ran alongside her with one hand near the back of the seat, not holding it but available. Wren watched until the girl made it the length of the lot without the wobble. Then she washed her plate and put it away and went to read on the couch and fell asleep around 4 in the afternoon, which was a thing her body did sometimes when it had been running on maintained tension for too long, and the tension finally eased. The investigation took 11 days. This was fast by the standards of how these things usually moved, and the speed was not accidental. Sparks had structured the filing packages in a way that made the pattern immediately visible to anyone reading them, connecting the inspection records to the payment records to the settlement documentation in a sequence that required minimal interpretation. He had also included in each package a cover letter, a single page that summarized the key findings in plain language and identified the multiple points of corroborating evidence. He had done this because he understood that the people receiving these filings were busy people with large caseloads, and that the difference between an investigation that opened quickly and one that waited in a queue was often nothing more than whether the person reading the first page understood immediately why it mattered. They understood immediately. The county health department was the first to act. Gerald Mott, the inspector, was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours of the filing arriving on his supervisor's desk. His caseload was reassigned, and a review of his last 2 years of inspections was opened, which was going to take some time and was going to produce findings that Wren would read about over the following months in the local paper, that she did not currently subscribe to, but would begin receiving after she moved. The Labor Department findings came next, a preliminary determination that Vickers Diner had underpaid at least 7 current and former employees over a period of 28 months. A number that Wren recognized because it matched exactly the window Sparks had identified in the financial records. The preliminary determination froze the diner's business license pending a full audit. Dale Vickers was arrested on the 11th day. Wren learned about it from Sparks, who sent her a message at 8 in the morning with a news link from the Grover's Mill weekly paper, which had posted the story on their website the previous evening. The story was 4 paragraphs. It named Dale Vickers and the charges, which included fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of a health inspection. It mentioned that additional charges were pending. It mentioned a $15,000 settlement that was now under scrutiny. It did not name June Carver, but it named Wren, not as a victim and not as a complainant. It named her as the person who had initiated the filing, which was technically accurate and which she had known was possible, but which still landed differently than she had expected when she read her own name in a local news story about the arrest of her former employer. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she set it on the kitchen table and looked at the morning light coming through the window, and thought about what it meant to have your name be the name attached to a thing you had done. She had spent 7 months in Grover's Mill being to Dale and to the kitchen staff, and to much of the dining room that knew about it, the fat girl, the slow one, the one who waddled, the one who was the joke. Now she was the name in the paper, the one who had filed. Both things were true simultaneously, and she was not sure yet how she felt about that. She found out 3 days later what June Carver had decided. She found out because June Carver called a reporter, not the reporter from the Grover's Mill weekly paper. A reporter from the Wichita Eagle, the larger daily paper that covered the region, who had picked up the story from the local wire and had been making calls. June Carver had called him unprompted using the number listed on the paper's website, and had said she had information about the case and that she was prepared to provide it on the record. The story ran on a Sunday. It was not a small story. It ran above the fold on the regional section with a photograph of June Carver sitting on her front porch in Salina. The same porch with the 2 chairs and the wind chime. And it was the kind of story that newspapers know how to write when they have a person who has been kept quiet for a year and has decided to stop being quiet. June Carver spoke about what had happened in the hospital, and about the 8 days, and the kidney function, and the 14 months of recovery that had not returned her to where she had been. She spoke about signing the agreement and not having a lawyer, and about the penalty clauses that had kept her silent. She spoke about the man who had come to her door and the woman who had come with him. And she described Wren without using her name as a young woman who was still working in the place where it was still happening. The story used June Carver's name. It used Dale Vickers' name. It did not use Wren's name, but it used the phrase, still happening, and it used the phrase, the documentation was built from the inside. And it used the phrase, one person kept a record. And Grover's Mill was a small town. And people in small towns understand these phrases. Wren was at Marjorie's when the story ran, drinking coffee and reading it on her phone. And Marjorie came over with a fresh cup she had not asked for and set it down without saying anything and went back behind the counter. And that was how Wren knew that the phrases had been understood. She called Brick. He answered on the second ring. She told him about the story. He said he had read it. She said June made her own call. He said, yes. She said, I didn't know she was going to do that. He said, she didn't tell us she was going to. She made her own decision in her own time. There was a pause. Wren said, she said she was 14 months too late. He said, she wasn't. She said, no. After a moment, he said, there's something I want to talk to you about. Are you free this afternoon? She was. They met at Marjorie's, which had by this point become the default location for conversations that needed a table and a cup of coffee and a degree of quiet. Marjorie herself was present, which she always was. and she brought them both coffee, without being asked, which she always did, and then retreated to the other end of the counter and occupied herself with something that gave them privacy without distance. Brick had a folder on the table. He opened it and slid it toward her. The folder contained a document that was 11 pages long and that was formatted in the specific way of legal contracts, prepared by someone who takes contracts seriously. Wren picked it up. She read the first page. She read the second page. By the third page, she understood the structure of what she was looking at. It was a partnership agreement for a restaurant business that did not yet exist. The proposed business name was left blank on the current draft, indicated by brackets with the placeholder text business name to be determined. The address was likewise blank. The terms were specific: a 50% stake to each party operating control of culinary and front-of-house decisions, to one partner, financial and administrative oversight to the other, with a provision for transition of financial oversight. As the culinary partner built operational familiarity over the first 2 years, she read the financial section. The investment amount was specific. It was not a number she had expected. It was enough to lease and fit out a small restaurant space hire, an opening staff cover operating costs for the first 6 months, while the business established itself and provide Wren with a living wage from day one. She set the document down. She looked at Brick. She said, "No." He looked at her without surprise. He had the expression of someone who had anticipated this answer. She said, "I know what this is supposed to be, and I know you mean it to help. But I have spent 7 months in a place where a man with money had authority over me because of the money. And I am not going to start the next part of my life owing something to someone who can hold it over me. Not even you. Not even for this." Brick did not respond immediately. He picked up his coffee cup. He looked out the window at the street. Then he said, "Turn to page 8. She turned to page 8. Page 8 was the section titled Dispute Resolution and Equity Protection. She read it. The clause on page 8 specified that in the event of any disagreement between partners regarding operating decisions, the culinary partner held final authority over all decisions affecting the restaurant's identity, menu, and customer experience. The financial partner held final authority only over decisions requiring capital expenditure above a specified threshold. And even those decisions required a 30-day notice period, during which the culinary partner had the right to source alternative financing and buy out the financial partner's stake at the original investment value, plus a rate of return specified in the addendum. The clause on the bottom of page 8 said the financial partner acknowledges that this investment is made in recognition of demonstrated competence and expressed intent, and does not constitute authority over the operational or creative direction of the business. Wren read that sentence twice. She said, "You had a lawyer write this." He said Sparks wrote the first draft. A lawyer in Wichita reviewed and revised it. She had her own opinions about it. Wren looked at the document in her hands. She thought about the arithmetic of her life. The coffee can above the refrigerator. The $2,400, the distance between where she was and where she was going. She thought about walking through a door on the first day of culinary school in Wichita and learning a set of skills that would belong to her and could not be taken from her regardless of what happened after. She thought about walking through a different door on the first day of something she had built herself. She said, "I want to take this to a lawyer. My own." He said, "Yes. I expected you would. Take as long as you need." She said, "I'll have one change." He said, "Tell me." She said, My name goes on the door first." He looked at her for a moment. He said it was always going to, always going. She found the lawyer through the legal aid network that Sparks had used to help June Carver, a woman in Wichita who specialized in small business formation and who had a reputation for reading contracts the way a surgeon reads a patient's chart, with the specific intent of finding everything that could go wrong and deciding in advance how to address it. Her name was Frances Aldrich, and she was 57 years old, and she had no patience for documents that said one thing in plain language and something different in the language of subclause and addendum. She read Brick's partnership agreement in 40 minutes and called Wren with 2 questions and one suggested revision, which concerned the buyout timeline in a specific scenario that Wren would not have identified herself, but which Frances considered worth clarifying. Wren relayed the suggested revision to Sparks. Sparks incorporated it into a revised draft within an hour. Frances read the revised draft and said, "Sign it." Wren signed it on a Thursday afternoon at Frances Aldrich's office in Wichita, with Frances as a witness and a notary present. And when it was done, she sat in the chair across from Frances's desk and felt the specific sensation of something that had been held open, finally closing properly, not slamming but latching, the quiet sound of a thing settling into the position it was designed to occupy. Frances said, "You're going to be fine." She said it the way people say things when they mean them specifically, not as encouragement but as assessment. Wren believed her. The space they found was on the north end of Grover's Mill, 3 blocks from Marjorie's, in a building that had been a hardware store, and before that a feed supply, and that had the bones of something that had housed practical human activity for a long time, and had the specific structural dignity that comes with that. The ceilings were 14 feet, and the floors were original wood, and the light from the east-facing windows in the morning was the kind of light that makes food look the way food is supposed to look. The fit-out took 6 weeks. Wren made every decision herself with Brick present at most of the contractor conversations, but speaking only when she asked for his opinion, and not speaking when she did not. He had a way of being in a room that was available without being intrusive, a quality she had noticed the first night in the diner, and that had not changed, and that she understood now as something he had developed over a long time. The skill of presence without imposition. The kitchen was her primary focus. She spent 2 weeks working out the layout with the contractor, moving through the space with the specific knowledge of someone who had spent years in kitchens and had learned through proximity to both good and bad examples exactly what she needed and exactly what she did not. The prep area was organized around a particular logic of movement, and she explained this logic to the contractor in the way she had explained the journal to Brick page by page, not assuming comprehension, but building toward it. The dining room was smaller than it looked from the outside, because the kitchen took the space it needed, and the kitchen took priority. There were 14 tables. She had wanted 12, but Frances had run the numbers and said 14 was the difference between a business that covered its costs and a business that covered its costs with a margin. She trusted Frances on this. The furniture did not match. This was intentional. She had spent 6 weeks in the evenings going to estate sales and secondhand shops and the kind of places where people bring things they no longer have room for. And she had brought back chairs and tables that had nothing in common with each other, except that each one was solid, and each one had been used by people who had sat at it for some purpose that mattered to them at the time. She arranged them in the dining room, and they looked the way she had wanted them to look, like a room that had accumulated itself over time, rather than been selected from a catalog. There was a name on the door, She had painted it herself, which was not the most efficient use of her time, in the weeks before opening, but which was the decision she needed to make. She had learned hand lettering from a video series she had watched on her phone over 3 evenings, practicing on paper first, until the letters had the weight and evenness she wanted. She had painted the name in dark letters on the glass of the front door. The script not quite like anything she had seen elsewhere, something between formal and informal. The handwriting of someone who had thought about it. Wren's table. Not Wren Calloway's table. Not the Wren's Table Grover's Mill restaurant. Just the 2 words, the name and the thing, as simple as she could make it. Brick had seen it the morning she finished. It had come by to check on something with the contractor, and had stopped in front of the door and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he had gone in. She had not asked him what he thought, and he had not said. Opening day was a Saturday in September. Wren had hired a staff of 7, which was the number Frances had said was appropriate for 14 tables with the opening menu she had planned. She had found them through the same network of small-town knowledge that connected everything in Grover's Mill, a cook who had been working in a truck stop on the highway and who had trained years ago in a program in Kansas City and had come back to take care of his mother and had not found a kitchen worth staying in since. A front-of-house manager named Ruth, who was 50 years old, and had run the front of 2 different restaurants in Hutchinson, and who had driven 40 miles to the interview, and had been worth every mile. 2 servers, a prep cook, a dishwasher, and a part-time baker who made a specific kind of brown bread that Wren had tasted at a church function and had asked about directly. She had told them at the staff meeting the week before opening what she expected. She had said it the way she had said the things she believed directly and without performance. She said, "I expect you to do your jobs with care, and I expect you to treat each other and the customers with the same care." She said, "If something is wrong, you tell me, not because I'm asking you to take on my problems, but because knowing what is wrong is how we fix it." She said, "This is not a place where you will be treated the way some of you have been treated in kitchens before. If it becomes that place, I want you to tell me." She had watched them listen to this. She had watched Ruth nod once with the specific nod of someone who has heard this speech before and is assessing whether the person giving it means it. She meant it. Opening day, the reservation list had filled within 4 days of the listing going live on the local business directory. Grover's Mill was a small town, and it had been paying attention to the story of the diner down the street and the arrest that had followed, and the woman whose name was in the paper. And small towns have a specific kind of appetite for the next chapter, for what comes after the thing that everyone has been watching. She did not think about this consciously. She was thinking about the kitchen. The first service was lunch, which was easier than dinner, in the way that first tests are designed to be easier than what comes later. She moved through the kitchen with the specific attention of someone running a system she has rehearsed in her mind many times, and is now running in the body for the first time, where the gap between the mental model and the physical reality is usually small but always present, and must be found and closed quickly. The gaps were small. She closed them. By 2 in the afternoon, the lunch service was done and the tables had turned twice, and the kitchen had functioned the way she had designed it to function. And Ruth had managed the front of house with a competence that was visible without being demonstrative. And the cook, whose name was Earl, had plated everything with the care of someone who had been waiting for a kitchen worth caring about. She stood in the kitchen during the break between lunch and dinner service and let herself have 2 minutes of nothing, just standing. The kitchen around her settling into the quiet between uses. The smell of what had been cooked still in the air. and the smell of cleaning underneath it. She had built this. She had not done it alone. But the vision had been hers, and the decisions had been hers, and the journal in her bag was the record of why it existed, the record that had made it possible. She went back to work. The dinner service was fuller. All 14 tables, the maximum she had set for the opening week as she and the staff found their rhythm. The dining room filled with the specific sound of people eating in a place they had chosen to be. Conversation and silverware, and the occasional sound of something being found to be better than expected, which is a sound. A kitchen can hear even through a closed pass-through, if it knows how to listen. Wren was in the kitchen for most of the service. She came out twice, once to address a substitution request that Ruth flagged for her, and once simply to look at the room to see the 14 tables occupied, and the room doing what she had designed it to do, which was to hold people in a way that made them want to stay a little longer than they had planned. At 9:15, during the last stretch of the dinner service, Ruth came through the kitchen door. She said, "There is a woman at table 12 who asked to speak with you. She said it is not a complaint. She said she would like to introduce herself." Table 12 was in the back of the room. The corner table, the one that Wren had chosen as the corner table, partly because the light there in the evening was good, and partly because it was the same position in the room as the booth that Brick and his crew had occupied in Vickers' diner. The table in the corner with the wall behind it, and the clear sightline to the front door. She went out. The woman at table 12 was 60 years old, or close to it, with gray in her hair and a careful wariness in her expression that had eased somewhat since the last time Wren had seen it. She was sitting alone at the corner table with the remains of a meal that had been mostly finished, a glass of water, and a folded napkin on the side of the plate in the way that indicates the kind of finishing that leaves time to think before the bill arrives. June Carver looked up when Wren came to the table. She looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone completing a calculation. They began some time ago. She said, "I saw the listing and I drove over. I didn't know it was yours until I was already inside. I looked at the door." Wren said, "How did the food sit with you?" June Carver said, "Very well." She said it plainly in the way of someone whose relationship to the question of how food sits is no longer theoretical. Her recovery had been long, and the relationship between eating and trust had been renegotiated in the course of it, and Wren understood this without it needing to be explained. Wren said, "I'm glad." June Carver said, "Thank you." She said it the same way she had said it at the door when Brick and Wren had come to Selena, the same quality in it, no performance, just the word doing the work of the word. Wren said, "You didn't have to go to the paper. That was yours to decide." June Carver said, "I know." She looked at the table for a moment. 14 months is a long time to carry something. I thought I was carrying it quietly. Then a man I had never met sat in my living room and told me about someone who was still in there. And I understood that the quiet was not protecting me. It was protecting him. She looked up. She said, "The attorney, the young man found me Francis. She says the agreement is being challenged. The penalty clauses. She thinks they won't hold given the circumstances under which I signed." Wren said, "I know Francis." June Carver said she told me. There was a moment of something that was not quite silence and was not quite conversation. The pause that happens between people who have been connected by a sequence of events they did not design and are still learning the shape of the connection. Then Wren asked if she would like anything else. June Carver said she thought she would have the dessert menu if there was one. Wren went back to the kitchen and got the dessert menu and brought it out herself. The last table to leave that night was table 12. By 11, the dining room was empty and the kitchen was clean, and the staff had gone. Ruth had offered to stay to help close, but Wren had told her she would do it. This was the first night, and she wanted the first closing to be her own. The way the first morning of something is different from all the mornings that come after. She walked through the dining room in the quiet after everyone had gone. She straightened chairs that did not need straightening. She looked at the 14 mismatched tables in the light of the few lamps she had left, on the warm, uneven light of a room in the evening. She was near the front of the room when she heard the door. She turned. Brick was standing in the open doorway. He was not wearing his vest. He had a jacket on over a dark shirt, and he looked the way he sometimes looked when he was not performing the particular version of himself that the vest required, slightly older and slightly more ordinary, in a way that she found she had come to understand as the version of him that existed when the road had been put down for the night. She had known he was coming. He had called in the afternoon to say he would stop by after the service. He had asked if late was all right. She had said late was fine. He came in. He looked at the room. He looked at the name on the door, visible through the glass, from inside the letters, dark and deliberate. He looked at the 14 tables and the mismatched chairs and the east-facing windows that were dark now, but that she had told him about, and that he would see in the morning if he happened to be there when the light came through. He chose a table. He chose the corner table, which was table 12, which June Carver had occupied, which had the wall behind it and the clear sightline to the front door. Wren noticed that he sat facing the room rather than the wall, and that this was the position in which he had sat in the other diner. The position from which he had been watching the room when she had walked toward his table 7 months ago. She went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of him and sat down with the other across the table. They were quiet for a moment in the way they had learned to be quiet with each other, which was the comfortable way, the way that does not require filling. He looked around the room. He said Jenny would have liked this place. The way he said it was not the way a person says something that has been prepared. It was the way a truth that has been held for a long time comes out when the moment is finally specific enough to receive it. Wren looked at him. He was still looking at the room, at the tables and the chairs and the light. He said she loved kitchens. Not the cooking specifically, she was never patient enough for the cooking, but the idea of them. The gathering part. The part where the food is the reason, but the people are the point. He looked down at his coffee. He said she worked in a place that had a kitchen like this. Good light in the morning. Before the supervisor. Before the 2 years that I watched from a distance and told myself she was stronger than she looked and would find her own way through it. He stopped. He picked up his coffee. He said, "You were the first time I sat in a room like that and did the thing I should have done before. Asked the question instead of deciding in advance that the answer was that she was fine." Wren held her coffee cup in both hands. She said, "Tell me about her." He looked up. She had said it directly, without qualification, in the way you say something, when you mean it specifically, and do not want to leave space for the person you are saying it to talk themselves out of the request. She had said it because she genuinely wanted to know, not to comfort him, not to reciprocate the things he had done for her. Because she was sitting across from someone who was carrying a specific person in him and had been carrying that person for 5 years. And she wanted to know who the person was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he began. He talked for a long time. He talked the way a person talks when they have been keeping something in good condition for years, handling it carefully, not letting it degrade, and now have a place to bring it out. He talked about Jenny at 7 and at 15 and at 20 about the specific and accumulated details of a person whom he had known from her beginning, and whom he had not known well enough at the end. The irony of proximity without knowledge, that is the specific grief of parents who were present and still missed things they should have seen. He talked about the good things. He made sure Wren understood that there were good things, that Jenny had been a person with a specific gravity who filled rooms the way certain people fill rooms, not loudly but completely, so that her absence when it came had a shape to it that matched her exactly. He talked about the kitchen she had loved, and the light in the morning, and the reason she had stayed in the job longer than she should have, which was the same reason Wren had stayed in hers, because leaving required a destination, and the destination required resources that took time to accumulate. And the time was something the job was making harder to accumulate by the day. He said, "I used to think that if I had just asked her how it was going, specifically not the general question that parents ask because they want reassurance, but the specific question that requires a specific answer, I could have known sooner. I don't know if that's true, but I know I didn't ask it." He looked at his coffee. He said, "The man who came to your table in the other place and sent you over. The thing I said to myself while I watched you walk across that room was that I was going to ask. That was all. Just ask the question this time instead of assuming the answer." Wren looked at him. She said, "You did?" He said, "Yes." They sat in the quiet of the room. Outside the windows, the town was dark and late, the particular stillness of a small town after 10 on a Saturday, the kind of stillness that has depth to it, that is not the absence of activity, but the presence of accumulated quiet. The kind of night that makes rooms feel more themselves. Wren set her coffee cup on the table. She reached into her apron pocket and took out the journal. She set it on the table between them. Brick looked at it. She said, "I've been keeping this for 7 months. And before tonight, I thought the last entry was going to be the one I wrote the morning before the filings went in. I thought that was the end of the record." She opened the journal to the back pages. She found the last entry, which was from 3 days ago, from the morning she had finished painting the name on the door. She read it to herself before she read it aloud. It said what she had needed it to say in the direct handwriting that was her handwriting, the one she used for facts. She read it aloud. She said, "Opening on Saturday. The name is on the door. It looks the way I wanted it to look. I don't know yet what the record after this will contain, but I know it will be different from the record before, not because the hard things will stop, because I know now that they are not the only things worth writing down." She closed the journal. She set it on the table, not between them this time, but off to the side in the way you set something down when you are done with it in its current form, and it is going to become something else going forward. She said, "I'm going to put this in the kitchen drawer, in the prep station. So the record of what it took to build this place is in the place it built." Brick looked at the journal on the table. He said, "That's right." She picked it up. She took it into the kitchen. She opened the drawer of the prep station, the large one on the left side where she kept the things that needed to be accessible without being in the way. She put the journal in. She closed the drawer. The kitchen was clean and quiet and dark except for the low light she had left on over the pass-through. It smelled of what had been cooked and the cleaning that had followed. And underneath those things, the particular smell of a kitchen that has been used for the first time, the smell of something becoming what it was built to be. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she went back out to the dining room where the coffee was getting cold. and the man in the corner table was looking at the room with the expression of someone who has set something down and is sitting with the fact of having done it, which is a different and quieter thing than the carrying. She sat down. They finished their coffee. Outside Grover's Mill was dark and settled and exactly itself the same town it had been on the evening 7 months ago when 4 motorcycles had turned onto 5th Street and pulled into the parking lot of a diner on the corner, and a man had asked a woman a question that had not required an unusual amount of courage to ask, but that had not been asked before, and had therefore changed in the small and irreversible way that the right question at the right time always changes things the angle at which the days that followed had landed. The name on the door caught the light from the street lamp when Wren finally locked it behind her. The letters were deliberate and unhurried, the handwriting of someone who had taken the time to learn how to write them, because the name mattered and the door mattered, and the thing being named mattered enough to do right. 2 words: the name and the thing it named. Simple as she could make it. Simple was enough. Simple was exactly right.